conference participants, that's all of you, and especially those of you who came from far, far away to be with us today. When you all arrived in town yesterday, you certainly noticed that there is absolutely no reason to be in Michigan in March. And if you walked over from the hotel, then you know that all the more. But certainly there's one reason to be in Michigan and at Michigan State University in March, and that is the profound personal and intellectual interest that we all have in the subject of slavery and the historic slave trades. Something that touched the lives of millions of people and shaped and continues to shape the world today. Ask yourself if an interest in the history of slavery and slave trading is vibrant today, and you can look around you and see that clearly the answer is yes. Ask yourself if an interest in pushing the humanities in a new direction through the creation of online open source databases and web-based data sharing platforms and platforms that do analysis, and you can look around the room and say, yes, there's a great interest in that. There will be 44 presentations at this conference. Counting our partners, over 50 scholars traveled to be with us here today and tomorrow. Where did the presenters come from? We have at least 9 from Canada. Many came from Canada with passports from elsewhere. Yay, Canada. We have at least 6 from Europe. We have 1 participant from the Bahamas, which is terrific. If we count Jorge Felipe, who lives here right now, we have somebody from Cuba. At least 4 traveled directly from Brazil to be with us today. We have 1 participant, welcome Gwen, who traveled from Mexico. And we also have somebody from Benin, West Africa. So welcome to you all who traveled so far. The rest of our participants are from here in the United States, and one thing that I'm really thrilled with is it's only about half of the presenters, a little over half, are actually from the United States. This truly is an international conference, and I thank you all for traveling so far to be with us here today. I did a little math because I think it's fun, and the folks who traveled from Brazil, our 4 who traveled directly from Brazil, moved about 4,550 miles as the crow flies. But we have 1 participant who came further than that, and that's Bernard Dosa, who traveled as the crow flies 5,768 miles to be with us. So get the prize for the farthest travel. Thank you. No matter where you're from, thank you again for being here. Thank you for braving immigration if you had to do that. Thank you for braving the weather. And most importantly, thank you for coming here to share your ideas with us today. One of my duties up here is to give you the ground rules. I will apologize for the ground rules, but we got to have rules. So when you come up here to present, we're hoping for some it's an open area. It's easy to get around here. But we're hoping for some quick transitions between panels and some quick transitions between presenters. We have some seats down here. If you're going to present, you could come down. You can stay where you are if you can get to the stage quickly. Each presenter will have, 12 minutes. And we will be draconian with the timing. Ethan is here, I'll be here, we'll keep you informed of how much time you have. We will do very simple introductions at the start of each panel. We will not, I apologize now, we will not go on and on and on about each biography. You can share those with each other later. And then we will absolutely have time at the end of each panel for questions. And what I'd like to do is to have each panel will have the presenters go one after the next, and then we'll have questions for everybody after that. So there is definitely time for discussion. We had the option of 20 papers and a time limit of about 20 minutes per presentation. Or we could do 40 papers and a time limit of about half that. So we debated what to do, and frankly, all of you who were here who sent us in paper proposals, it was impossible to say no. And the other thing we really wanted was a lot of participation. We want folks to get to know each other, and we want you to exchange ideas. We hope that you'll become part of the project that we're all involved in here. So, you know, we made the decision to invite more people and have shorter presentations. So we appreciate your...
We want community. We want you guys to talk to each other, especially between sessions. questions. So we're going to have question and answer time. And we have some of the best experts in the world on slave data. So it's a wonderful time for us to all kind of not just talk at people, but talk with people, which is really important.
So when you get up here, get right into your paper. You don't need to thank us. We thank you for being here. So just launch right into it and take full advantage of your 12 minutes. Okay, so briefly some background that others will cover, but I just want to lay this out, and hopefully we started late. I don't want to take too much time. But just briefly some background about how we all got into this room. In spring of 2013, a digital history project called Slave Biographies, which was eventually created and launched here at Michigan State University, was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we thank the NEH for funding Slave Biographies in spring of 13. It was pictured as a publishing platform for databases centered on slavery and the slave trade. The primary unit of analysis was to be, and is, if you look at the website, enslaved individuals, named people. Catherine Foley from Matrix, Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, and Paul Lachance were instrumental in crafting best practices and a metadata scheme for the project. Their work has been foundational to everything that has followed. Now, in the meantime, a number of scholars, and especially those who are founding partners on the Enslaved.org project, were working on open source web-based projects centered on slaves and historic slave trades. We'd meet at conferences, we'd do presentations at ASA, AHA, and elsewhere, and we'd all agree over and over and over again that we needed to share data and to get others involved in doing so. We all agreed that we needed to get our data in conversation and unsilo it. We needed to work in teams. We needed partnerships. Then, a few years ago, Don Waters, a program officer at the Mellon Foundation, met Dean Rayberger at a conference. After they talked, Don said, "Bring scholars working on slave databases to the foundation in New York City, and let's see what we can make happen." A few months later, in a conference room at the Mellon Foundation, Enslaved.org was conceived. In a nutshell, the project does three things, and others will talk about this in detail, and I don't want to take too much time on it right now. But in a nutshell, very briefly, the project is really about three things. First, it is a publishing platform, much like the continuation, in fact, indeed, of slave biographies. It is a place where scholars can publish peer-reviewed, and this is key, peer-reviewed, databases with information about people involved in historic slave trades, about slaves and enslavers, that is both enslaved people and free people. So it's a place where we will have, if you have a data set and you don't have the means to publish it yourself on your own servers, you can supply that data. We will have teams of experts, just like a journal, where we can send your database off to be peer-reviewed. If our experts think the database should be preserved and posted for the world to see, we will make that possible. And I think this is an important innovation for digital humanities. There are a lot of people involved in digital humanities work, of course, and all of you, and many of your colleagues, of course, say, well, I don't know what to make of this. It's not a book. It's not an article. It's not peer-reviewed. What do I do with it? Well, part of this project then that our partners have conceived will make that peer review process possible. Second, Enslaved.org is a place where scholars with databases on their own servers, independent databases, projects they've created at their own universities. It's a place where scholars with these sorts of databases can link their projects through what we call the Enslaved Hub, a hub we've created here at Michigan State University with the help of the Mellon Foundation. You can link that data to other data sets. And finally, the project ultimately will be a place where scholars and the public can go to then search over many data sets to draw conclusions about the past. It'll be a place where the public can do genealogical research and where college students and K-12 classrooms can find written biographies of enslaved individuals. I stress that searches across data sets will summarize information and allow individuals to visit the original and unchanged data set. That is, the platform won't take and permanently keep data from independent partner projects. Rather, it will summarize data and then push users out to those projects. We hope that all of you want to be part of this project. That is, either if you have independent projects that already exist or that will exist, that you will talk to us over the course of the next couple of days about finding ways as we move into phase 2 of the Enslaved project to link your data sets with the rest of those. Or if you have data sets that you haven't published yet, that you will consider submitting those for publication on the Enslaved platform. Again, my warm welcome to all of you, and I will hand this off to Dean again if he wants to say anything else. He's hiding.
I'm hiding.
A couple of details. One, internet. If you pull up the internet, you will see that there's an MSU guest. Okay, so if you're looking for internet, pull it up, MSU guest, you read through the stuff and hit I accept. And
theoretically, the Eduroam will work. If you had Eduroam, we've come into the Eduroam universe late to the party, but Ethan says it works.
Yeah, it should work. If it doesn't, it's Dean's fault.
Second, if any of you need an elevator to get in and out of this space, there is one here that comes right out onto the stage. So it's kind of it's a beautiful space, but it's difficult to get to. But we do have access right here via elevator to get from there down to this space. Bathrooms.
Restrooms are upstairs over here.
Okay. Anything else?
Anything else? Yes. At lunchtime, we're going to raise the screen, and Walter will do an interpretive dance on the stage. But while that interpretive dance is going on the stage, you will be invited to go to lunch. You should have your ticket, if you're a speaker, in the back of your thing, right here, to go to Shaw Hall. We'll be showing people how to get over. It's only a little walk away from here, right? That way.
We will have people to guide you.
We'll have people guide you for a wonderful lunch. Anything else we need for the logistics?
Anybody have any questions?
Any questions, concerns?
Reception this evening.
Oh, yes, we have a reception this evening at the Beggar's Banquet, which is about 3 blocks west. Bruce, was I inaccurate saying just 2 blocks? Yeah, okay. 3 blocks west of your hotel, which should become quite the adventure because we have all kinds of construction in the way, so it's kind of like Survivors, only different. You have to go through the construction, but you should be able to get there for our reception for the conference.
All right, shall we launch into the panels?
I think we have actually about 10 minutes before the panel starts for people to get coffee, take a short break, and get ready for our first panel presentation.
13 minutes to take.
All right, then we'll get going. Well, we have to at least let, is it Daryl's first?
Yep.
Let Daryl get set up. He'll be our first presenter here. Darryl Williams from the University of Maryland.
Good morning, everyone.
And one of our key partners in the project. Go ahead, it's all yours. He will be followed by Henry Lovejoy, another wonderful partner who will be speaking about images of slavery, right? Wow, see, I have the whole thing memorized. I don't even have to have the thing in front of me. Are we ready?
Is what's on your screen what you want projected at this point?
That's correct. So I don't want that.
That's the resolution on our screen. What's that?
Okay.
While Darryl is getting ready before he starts his presentation,
One thing you did sign as a speaker.
You're keeping
we
time?
Had you sign a video release. We have a number of people around the country who are doing similar work who weren't able to come here, so we are streaming it to them. We are going to turn around this board in a second to give you the streaming address. If you also have colleagues who would like to see the presentations, we have it on the board over here. We'll also be sending out an email to you the address for the streaming presentations. Duncan, you want to bring that a little forward so everyone can see it?
This thing?
No, the board, whiteboard.
Everyone should see Matrix. That's an important center here at MSU. It's about the most important center at Michigan State University.
Well, it's hard to read. We're going to send out an email to everybody with
We'll
the
send out an
The
email.
marker doesn't work.
I tried. All right. With little ado, then I will let Darryl take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Darryl Williams from the University of Maryland. I want to thank you all for starting out the morning with me, giving me an opportunity to give you a brief overview of the origin of today's gatherings, which is Enslaved Bios, which Walter spoke about just a little bit, and also how we might accomplish together a collective project moving forward here. As many of you know, and Walter did cover, and I'm being told right now the time, Walter did cover some of the materials about the history of slave biographies, or slave bios here. As many of you do know that the field research and databasing in the early days of digital work was largely conducted in isolation. It was certainly true that research methods in the origins of digital slave history and where we are today are collaborative and team-based, and research teams relied upon models of both the sponsored research and institutional support, which utilized tools which were different than traditional humanities lone scholar models. But nonetheless, individual research teams generally operated independently with different protocols, technologies, and languages. They had different funding sources, machine-readable data sets in the early days of the kind of project we're with today, and the statistical software that was used didn't often permit the easy sharing and repurposing of raw data. And popular audiences in particular were at a disadvantage for using some of the tools that were available to do statistical research. So as academics, archivists, librarians, and genealogists took up various machine-assisted archiving and analysis in the 70s, especially in the 80s onto the 90s, the lines of communication between these different communities remained rather tenuous. Some of this isolation, though, began to soften in the 1990s and diminished significantly after 1999 with the publication and commercialization of the multi-user data set, transatlantic slave database, slave trade database, which we'll be seeing version, I don't know exactly, 4.0 today, later today. It was particularly influential in establishing source-based empirical evidence at a much easier user face about standardization of field variables such as voyage ID, among others, and structured encoding protocols for that and other projects. But isolation was still a challenge, and some of this challenge in digital work, particularly for the history of enslavement, one of the key areas within the historical discipline where digital humanities really took root. So rapid expansion in research activities, and particularly in civil and ecclesiastical, government, genealogical, private collections, and we'll be hearing about some of that work, many resulted in the development of autonomous data sets, productivity suites, sometimes in Microsoft, sometimes in Google, sometimes in Apple, sometimes in proprietary software which often outpaced data standards. Field naming, metadata conventions have been especially idiosyncratic, which major gaps between initiatives that originate in the academy and those outside the academy, family history being one of those. So while encoding has remained uneven, we have the challenge that the same individual can appear in more than one data set, but the absence of protocols for naming conventions and idiosyncratic orthography, among others, can leave that individual in digital isolation, or sometimes more accurately, an unrecognized digital duplication. So the challenges then of cross-project search and analysis are amplified in statistical calculations for variables such as ethnicity or race or nation or color or occupation that have been encoded with widely varying practices ranging from strict standardization to fidelity to the original source. So these encoding of place names is also a different unique challenges with geolocational names found in various kinds of sources, which sometimes can be referenced to standardized tools, such as the Geographical Names Information System, or GeoNet, among others, but they also could depart dramatically from what the archives tell us. and what local knowledge may suggest. And certainly also the flattening of multilingual original sources into English translations or English tools, and the variety of languages used in field variables titles have added to new elements of uneasy intelligibility from one project to the next. And so whereas the tension between controlled and natural vocabulary has been part of the slave trade research since the early days of encoding, the struggle between what we now also find between clean and messy data remains systemic. So an additional layer to this kind of component is on the professional side, particularly within the academy, where the chief professional organizations have including the American Historical Association, have begun to kind of consider what digital work looks like, but as Walter mentioned here, standards for peer evaluation of digital databases, among others, remains uneven. This is acknowledged by the AHA in 2015, so just a couple years ago, but still this document here is an aspirational document that has not been directly connected to the benchmarks of graduate training and promotion and tenure at most research institutions. So the 2010s have been marked by the sustained and increasingly successful attempts to overcome isolation. Walter mentioned this, and we're going to talk about this in just a little bit more, and also addressing the messiness of data, sometimes trying to clean up the messiness of data, sometimes saying data is messy. Let's deal with the messiness. The history of the slave trade experienced this push toward the adoption of open source software and lowering the restrictions of data usage for non-commercial purposes, various Creative Commons, linked over data, et cetera. Slave biographies, founded in 2011 is what I have. You said 13.
That's right.
2011. Okay, here's 2011. And today, Enslaved are two projects here at Matrix, at MSU, that have really been leaders in this international push toward beyond data digital isolation. Slave biographies, founded by the NEH and later Enslaved by the Mellon Foundation, have both been projects around the goal of creating online, open source, open data, free of charge search and discovery resources to allow the researcher to permit statistical calculations and visualizations of metadata about enslaved individuals and cohorts across one or more data sets, to build the elements of biographical narratives structured around people in particular, but also places, events, and relationships in Atlantic slavery, and to identify and disambiguate enslaved individuals who have been encoded in one or more data sets. So slave biographies in particular, look at that. Slave biographies was originally envisioned as a pilot for 6 data sets. Gwendolyn Minlow Hall, Walter Hawthorne were the key leaders, the PIs on this. Gwendolyn's work particularly in Louisiana, from the colonial into the early American US period here. Walter's in particularly in the late colonial into the early independence period in Maranhão in Brazil. When the website was launched, maybe the website was 2013, or is that also 2011? 2012, let's just say 2012. Okay, whereas the website was launched, it featured these 2 anchor data sets that they were developed by our 2 principal scholars, and go back, stars here, and with the tremendous work, we've already heard also of Catherine Foley, Paula Shantz, among others, including the team at Matrix. The 4 other data sets were part of the original pilot set, never quite made it to the original website, which still kind of looks like this. But nonetheless, we have these 2 core ones. You can see just by this kind of overview, the 2 core data sets for slave biographies, quite a lot of variety, not just in geographic variety, some temporal overlap, but the scale. Gwen's data set is very large and has a large number of variables, based on many hundreds, dozens, certainly probably hundreds of different types of sources. Walter's is relatively modest, though not small, relatively contained number of variables, almost all drawn from one single archival repository in Maranhão.
And type of document, too.
What's that?
Type of document.
Type of documents. A lot of variety here. But nonetheless, this provided with a kind of foundation. It both has some of the challenges, but also the foundation for what slave biographies attempted to do. It also became the prototype for being an archival repository for peer-reviewed data sets. The chief goal for both projects, particularly for slave biographies, was defining a core set of metadata fields on enslaved people and cross-walking those fields between various data sets for federated searching and analysis. And that is possible, that was made possible, is possible among slave biographies. You have these 2 different data sets, but you can do some work across them. Predictive disambiguation is kind of something we are kind of moving toward, which is sort of driven by trying to predict and this is not really the case with these 2 data sets, but it's a hope that one Pedro Congo in one data set is or is not a Pedro Congo, for instance, in another data set. It has been one of the greatest challenges, but also one of the greatest payoffs, and particularly we're moving toward this in the enslaved data model. The existence of core sets of metadata is likely to structure a shared community framework, and I think we're all part of that here. Matrix team has been adamantly defending the principle that partner projects and their subject expert teams remain stewards of their own research and data. And at the conclusion of this proof of concept phase that we're out in, which now-ish, the field will have a working model of what linked open data, some of the things which were inspired originally by slave biographies. And I just want to, we still face the opportunity and challenges of growing the data set, particularly slave biographies piece, beyond the 2 core data sets, and then what I'll show here is the 7 core data sets of enslaved, each relying on different fairly robust levels of academic expertise and support that we cannot expect from new partners. It's great, you know, that we have these great research institutions which have some sponsorship locally and nationally, but you know, that's not always the case, and we have fantastic work out there. How do we access and how do we join that work to this big project here? So, so some of the models that we're working with here, and I hope some others at Matrix will be talking about this within Enslaved as a slave ecosystem, that's my term, I think they use the word data model here, in which particularly something called this enslaved publishing platform will have various kinds of publication, archiving, peer review, part of that, slave biographies being one of the many different partners which we've also heard about here. I do want to stress, and this is the new landing page for slave biographies, we have already had some experience with this. 3 new data sets have been partnered with slave biographies. The first was Brian Mitchell's data set from Fleabag database in New Orleans, 2,800 or so person records. The work that I've been doing, I started at Stanford, 3 Africans of Brazil, 13,000 person records, and we'll also hear about later some work with Family Search with the potential to at least partner, if not incorporate, 25 million persons. Quite ambitious. So, but some of the problems that we have here and the challenges and opportunities are about what is the scope of our collection. Walter stressed here that we're focusing on named individuals, you know, which is a fantastic thing to do, but we have data sets which don't necessarily privilege the named individual. Are those data sets going to be appropriate or not for slave biographies? What do you do with non-named individuals? Or in data and on the material that we have, or do they have to be excluded? Children of named individuals, do they get excluded, but the named individual, the parent, gets included, for instance? What do we do with natural and controlled vocabularies? Should it be standardized or not? These are different kinds of protocols. Messy versus clean data. Core fields, what are a standard in core fields? And again, also how do we deal with sources and citations and the great variety that we have in which enslaved people are both recorded and can be cited? And then also, is slave biographies ultimately to be, or can it be both, but is it going to be an archival repository, a sort of archive, which other people will do research, or is it itself a research space and a research tool? These are both possible, but we have to think about that. And then we have some issues about capacity. Capacity and resources are always a challenge for any kind of work. What is the capacity? But in that capacity, how do we establish protocols for rigorous peer review that we can be intelligible locally, but also can be intelligible to our peers, particularly for graduate training and promotion and tenure for faculty? And lastly, what does governance and sustainability look like for this project and as a model for other projects in digital studies? So I go back to the proposal that Gwen and Walter had in 2010 here for what was originally called Atlantic Slave Database Network, I think. Think about, you know, the models and the inspirations that they had 9 years ago, and I think they're still with us today, and I thank both of them for providing us with a foundation to do so, and I welcome you all to join that. Thank you. Ethan's excellent there with keeping me honest, so.
So I think we're going to have a few minutes for questions as Henry sets up.
Yes.
Just an addition to note on what you were, the fumbling around when the project started and everything, this brings up the whole issue of best practices. And one of the things that we've discovered in the past couple of years is as our databases have developed, we haven't always kept really good track of our own history.
Yes.
And this is part of best practices.
Yes. The about page, but also about keeping an archive of yourself as Yes, I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
Hi, Adler with Penn College. The question is, you mentioned that they built a kind of uniform schema into when at the beginning in terms of slavebiographies.org, but looking around the website, it's not published that schema itself anywhere on the website. Is it like just trying to think about, as people with other kinds of projects who want to make it interoperable, just having a list of what you're looking for and how you're coding it would be a useful resource?
There is, people are going to have to help me out who manage it. I believe there's some documentation about what the core data sets are, the crosswalk between the two that are there. But that's exactly where we're going to be moving forward in terms of both our advisory board about establishing what that would look like, and then working with individuals who might contribute about what you must do and what you might do, and how either you must do it in our way or you can do it in your way, but it will be translated into what some core data sets would be named.
Excellent question. And we are going to be sending out a URL to the participants, and we will welcome feedback. We've been working for years on these, and of course, it's been quite an interesting trial. So we'll be actually interested to hear your feedback, as well as if you do use them, how well they're useful and where the problems are. So again, it's the whole notion that this is going to be a community where we hope that people can work together and both be critical and helpful in moving everything forward.
For the history of the project, I think that the final report, which Catherine Foley wrote for the National Endowment for the Humanities grant, should be on the website. I don't know if it is or not.
I haven't seen it. I have your original proposal. I haven't seen the final report.
That is extremely interesting.
Okay.
It's based on the work that Paul Lachance, Catherine, and I did over a year's time, speaking to people from all over the world who were working on slave databases and coming up with some definition issues, and it might be a good way to show other people
Okay.
what we did at that point.
All right. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, everyone. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Henry Lovejoy. Today I'm going to be presenting on the Slavery Images website. You might recognize it as such, and about a month and a half ago, we relaunched it. So I'm just going to give a brief project history. This project really began in the 1980s at the Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Jerome Handler was doing a course on anthropology, and he began collecting images of slaveries on slides, if we remember these technological innovations. And by the 90s, he had retired, moved to Charlottesville, and by the late 90s, he had actually put this online. So just as a frame of reference, that's exactly when Voyages came out on CD-ROM. So this is a very innovative process that was taking place. So Handler is really one of these pioneers in DH in African diaspora. He, at the University of Virginia, he teamed up with Michael Tuitt, who programmed it. He now works for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab in, planetary chemistry and astrobiology. So he's long been removed from the project for better things. Between 1999 and 2018, the website went through various variations. And when I inherited it, because now Jerome Handler is in his 90s, the older version was operating on a PHP 5.6. And so we've completely revamped it using what is a set of open source code called Tripleif, and also with Omeka as the content management system, because they have good modules to connect these. We've received a lot of support from the University of Colorado Boulder, where we've hired the Brumfield Labs. Ben Brumfield is sitting over there. So their team, him and his wife Sarah, have really been responsible for pulling this together with Tripleif, which I'll explain very briefly. So if you want to learn more about the project history, Jerry wrote up a long project history of this. I've also included all of his research notes. several thousand pages of where he got the images from. So it's quite a long explanation if you're interested. There's also an interview of him discussing the evolution of the website, as well as archived versions of the website in PDF in case they eventually disappear offline. So we kind of have that history built into the project. So the Tripleif and the Handler to It collection is really a neat new technology that's really an open hub for images across the planet. So this is really tying in all of the images to a much larger collection. So when you go in and look at a particular image, we have a lot of metadata that Jerry put up online. So we want to begin annotating this out so that we can look at it in terms of people, places, events for the hub, the Enslaved hub. If you're going to image repositories and you begin to see this logo down here, the Tripleif, this is what we're essentially talking about, because what you're able to do is when you click on it, it pulls up a very nice viewer called Mirador, which has a lot more operability in terms of zooming in and out. You can adjust lighting and whatnot on it if you would like. So these are really great. There's also more features where you'll be able to annotate images online as well. So we're working on developing that. You can also pull up the metadata related to it as well. So there's really wonderful features about it. The other thing with Tripleif is you can actually change the layout. So you can drag and drop that Tripleif logo in. So any image repository out there that has Tripleif, you can combine, mix, and match, which is really, really nice. So you could take one from the Getty Institute, for example, and you can actually, if my fingers will do this on my pad easily enough, you can drag and drop an image from a second collection right in for comparative purposes. So it's a really great new technology for imagery. So in terms of slavery images and enslaved, again, we have a lot of information within the metadata that Jerry created over his life researching these images, and I really want to parse this out so that we can get more out of it. So we've been thinking about using an annotating service called Hypothesis so that this can facilitate some of this process as well. Let me just see here. So again, you can change this layout for comparative purposes, and you can expand it to really very large size dashboard if you would like. So you can really get a lot of images that you can compare for classes and teaching. So the second part of slavery images that's now gone into expansion is, as I moved to CU Boulder, I became affiliated with an international corporation that manufactures 3D scanners. And they've actually been going out and scanning World Heritage sites related to the slave trade. And this is some of the work that Joey Hill is doing as well in plantations in Virginia. And she's been collecting, and she'll be presenting on it later, but we're teaming up in terms of working with Trimble to scan more and more heritage sites. So we're talking about going to Ghana to get slave forts and do a number of other things with Krista Course, who's also been scanning some of these World Heritage sites all over the place. So to give you sort of an idea of what we're talking about, here's a plantation on St. John that Trimble has put together. And the problem that Trimble had is they want to showcase all of their technology, but they didn't have these long-term solutions for what to do with the data. So these point clouds are billions of rows of information in some circumstances of data that is geo-referenceable. And we can really begin to use this as sort of a teaching tool as well to show students and others what these plantations look like. It's also really important for recovery. St. John got hit by Maria just last year. It's sustained a bunch of damage. So in terms of rebuilding some of these sites, this will be possible with this type of data as well. Architecture really loves all of these sorts of things. So you can I wrote up an explanation of the site and the methodologies in terms of how to put it all together. We're eventually going to there's lighter versions. You might have heard of SketchUp. This is part of Trimble as well. And so we're able to show bring in a lot of this data into these actual physical places where a lot of people went through. So it might tie into some of the structure of Enslaved. Right now, one of the issues we're dealing with, we want to offer different versions of the data, but some of this data is a terabyte in size. So we're getting into difficulties of downloading. How do you transfer that amount of information succinctly? And so some of these problems we're working out at CU right now. The other really cool thing is Trimble has tiled this on what is called CC&JS. This is a set of code that's developed by someone who's teaching at the University of Pennsylvania. I sort of forget his name right now, but I can look it up if you want to know where this is from. So, and you can actually zoom in to where these sites reside on the planet. And while the tiling takes a little bit of time to load up, you can kind of, this program is actually amazing because you can see, here's Tortola, this is St. John. You can begin to see where the site actually resides on its scope. So you can actually zoom in. The idea is to begin building 3D educational environments, putting in the historical information, the narratives, designing it in different ways. Much like the slave voyages released the slave ship, these are really interactive ways to engage people more with the material. So in terms of Enslaved, this is going to be a really great opportunity to add imagery to a lot of the data so that for the general public, younger scholars, we can begin to really conceptualize some of this data, especially if we can link it to specific places or people. So the Handler collection right now has just over 1,200 images. There's a lot more out there. We've developed a form so people can contribute if they would want. We're testing the form right now. I'll actively be crowdsourcing at one point or another as this project continues on and on. So I think it's really important, though, also when we think about DH projects, is the sustainability plan when a website is going to outlast the life of a creator, or a contributor, or a director. And so I'm really honored that Jerry wanted me to take over this site. Really happy I got that opportunity, and I really want to carry it on further and further. So I will end there, so thank you very much.
We have ample time for questions. People want to ask questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. As I remember, Jerry made no representation about the accuracy of the documentation of his images, and I'm wondering if you were working on that aspect.
The accuracy of the images?
Yeah.
Yes, his metadata is an excellent template that really describes, the context of why the image was produced in many circumstances. Yeah?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but our streamers have asked that you repeat the questions. Everyone, when you are participant, you give your talk, please repeat the question that's asked of you so that we pick it up.
Now you're putting me on the spot. I'm
Yeah. No,
forgetting
no,
the question.
She asked you about the accuracy of the metadata.
The accuracy of the metadata, yes.
Right.
So, yes,
That Jerry Handler said made no representation that it was accurate.
well, I think he's done a great job.
Yes, I used it a great deal, and I really appreciate it. But I'm just saying that perhaps it can be, the documentation for the images could be improved, and I'm wondering if you were working on that aspect.
I think with all data, so Gwen was pointing out what to do with the accuracy of the data, and I think with all data, we're in a constant process of cleaning it, revising it, and so absolutely, if there's mistakes, contact me and I'll try and make changes.
Or if there's not no information or not enough information about how accurate the image is and where it came from.
Absolutely, and this is partly why I scanned and added his 2 boxes of research notes, so that also academics can go back and look at the process in which he did to find these images, where he got them from. A lot of them come from books, published before 1900, so there's going to be descriptions within them as well, so yes. Hi, David.
Have you tapped into the Zamani project, which goes back to the 1980s and basically scans African sites
I have not heard of this, actually. The Zamani project, David, was
Z-A-M-A-N-I.
Z-A-M-A-N-I?
Yeah, Zamani project.
No, but I will definitely look at,
Because it's, the guy that did that is also retired and well advanced in age. And that stuff needs to be integrated more locally.
thank you, I will definitely look this up. Yeah, Darryl.
How are you working through, the complications about rights, especially across nations and creators, publishers, and, contemporary legal restrictions, especially around
Excuse
images?
me.
Yeah, sorry. So Darryl was asking about copyright for images.
Yeah, intellectual
Property and all of these sorts of things. So most of the images are pre-1920, so for the most part, they're going to be open source to begin with. There's no copyright restrictions. And then also, Ben pointed me out to the Bridgman Art Library versus Corel Corp, which ruled that exact copies of public domain could not be protected by US copyright. So if you're taking a picture of an old image that's outside of copyright, then there's been a ruling in the States that says if you're not changing that original image, then it's technically open source. So I'm also using the Library of Congress's approach to this, which is sort of it's the responsibility of the user. So slavery images can't give or grant or deny permission to use the images. It's sort of up to the people to decide. This is sort of the same. I've used a lot of the language from the Library of Congress when talking about the copyright on the section on the website. So to give you ideas on where you can find that information, talk to the responsible people, and if we're in violation, then we'll be able to take down the image if someone really wants to. But in Jerry's experience, he's never had anyone complain in over 20 years. Yes?
I don't know if you're the one to ask, but is it possible to get a copy of that image?
I'm gonna talk about that next.
Okay.
So if folks have images or know where images are and they want to see them on the website, they scan it themselves and send you, or they say, would you please track this down and put it up?
Well, I like to think that a lot of scholars have images in their personal collections. So yes, there would be a form where you could upload if there's rights. We can also talk about how you can turn switches on and off. So if an image might not be, you're unsure about copyright, at least we can archive it and not display it publicly, but it will be with the collection. So thinking about some of these things as well. And these issues are very complicated, especially when you're dealing with images. But I think we all confront the problem of copyright in digital humanities. So, if I get in big trouble, I'll be taking them down, and but nothing's happened yet, and nothing's happened to Jerry because we're not selling images, we're not doing any of the things that people would likely complain about. It's for educational purposes. Yes.
With these 3D scanning of images, have you got any archaeological data that can go with it and might complement particularly written sources that may not record the full lives of enslaved people, but there may be archaeological?
So this lady, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Sorry? Helen. So Helen asked if there is archaeological data to go along with some of the 3D images. Absolutely, there will be. I arrived at CU 3 years ago, met Trimble, and now we're starting to kind of implement the hosting of it. So the way that this can expand is just, there's so many possibilities. I'm already talking with Christopher DeCourse, who's at Syracuse, who works on slave forts in Ghana. So we want to bring in, of course, the archaeological data. It's really a sister relationship in terms of these 3D images with archaeology and history. So, yes. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. All right, one thing I'm going to take advantage of is we do have actually a couple participants were unable to make it because of the weather. And also, hopefully, like now we got ahead of time, so I'm going to take that time to actually let us talk a little more about the Enslaved Project and let our partners talk a little about their participation as we go along.
So one of the things I want to do is just take 5 minutes and explain this wonderful diagram that we just developed that shows the real complexity of the Enslaved project so far. I'm going to explain in general just so you get a sense. We're going to be sending you the diagram, we'll be sending you the vocabulary and other information, but I want you to have a sense of, we didn't send it beforehand because we want to give you a sense of what this all means, because a lot of times I know historians are wonderful people, but they tend to jump in and just say, right, Paul? Yes. Anyways, so this is kind of an overall diagram of our Enslaved project, and it really has 3 layers. It has the front layer, which is on top, which has kind of 3 components to it. The middle component, which is the most important, is the Enslaved hub, and that's where people would come to search data. The best way to think about this is it's kind of like the Google of enslaved data. What we're going to do is be able to have you find it and then go back to the original source, right? And find all the original sources where it might appear. We also have a publishing platform, which is going to be the interface for taking in data, right? And we'll be talking a lot more about this as we go along. And then the enslaved narratives is part that we're working with Harvard and York is to present larger, fuller narratives, because we know that up front when we just launched this project, we're not going to have tons of data. We hope to have lots of data, but we do want to have some canned narratives about certain slaves that can connect to the data that's already there. It's more of an educational interface, an important part for Mellon as we go along. The middle layer is really all about the data, right? And over here you can see these are what we like to call the nodes. They're where the data comes from. And the data can come from a couple places. Either people can submit it to us as a data set, or it can be an existing project out there online, or it could be a project that we actually help to set up online, which Ethan is going to talk about in more detail at the end of the day today, because it's one of the most important ways where you'll interface with us. The middle place is my favorite place, because on one hand it's the easiest thing to explain, and on the other hand I have no competency to explain it whatsoever. Because basically this is just a big bucket of data. We take all your data and we throw it into a big bucket. We break it down into what we call triples. Subject, object, predicate, married, born, 1825. We just have all those little triples born up. Oscar is carpenter, right? And we throw those all into a big bucket. This is the wonderful thing about this project. We're actually at a time and place where we're bringing together the idea that there's so many people who have gone out and collected data and done wonderful work. At the same time, the technology is here. We can actually put up to 1 billion pieces, or several billion, right, Jeff? Where's my, Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you. Ethan can be my yes person. Henry
No.
usually does it for me, but yeah. So we can throw it into what's called the Blaze Graph database, and we're able to search over it. We're using a technology called Wikibase, which we'll be talking more about. Yes, it comes from Wikimedia Foundation, but it's actually it comes from their Wikidata. That's below Wikimedia, that actually is a wonderful source for data out there, and fairly accurate data that libraries across the country are starting to use and starting to work with. And we actually were in on the kind of ground floor of working with Wikibase and developing the tools for it. And then, of course, we're using linked open data. That's the triples, and that's what Wikibase does, converts everything to triples. And there is linked open data out there at different places, like Family Search, GeoNames, and Wikidata that we can also pull in and use as well on top of this. So you have that whole layer of data. And then down here is also one of my favorite layers. This is the one that's going to become most important to you, is how do we get your data into the Enslaved Hub? And we need a number of tools that will be able to refine the data, to clean the data, and to reconcile it. And we also have a nice disambiguation tool. Is the Marie in this database the same as the Marie in this database? We know that Paul Lachance will never ever let us say it's 100% accuracy that this Marie is this Marie. But we might be able to say 90%. We might be able to say 60%, we might be able to say 50%, but that's what we'll do for you is say, there's these different records out there, they might be related, look at them as historians. So we're trying to say, yes, there's lots of records out there, but we can help you get down to the ones that are most important. And that's the other side of this that's wonderful that you guys will have to think about, and why we just didn't send out the vocabulary to begin with, and why Paul and Catherine and Gwen worked so hard on it, is yes, it is a refinement. Yes, it is a reduction. Yes, it does not represent your full data. But that's okay because we want to be able to have a way that people can search over everything, but then go back to your data, right? And find the total richness of your data. Because let's face it, again, why do I always pick on historians? I usually pick on Walter. Where is he? Historians are wonderful. They go out and collect lots of data, but they tend to collect data for their specific project, with their specific field names and their specific field identities, and then the way they fill in the fields. And so we have to regularize it in some way and make it more consistent. We're also hoping, and this is where you guys will come in, is if we can put best practices forward, can you help us to refine those so people beginning to collect this data might do a better job of thinking about how can I do data for everyone and not just me, right, across the board. So this, in a sense, and this little box over here is one of my favorites, the shape expressions. That actually just says, we're bringing in this data and we have to make sure it's valid, right? And one of the things that we've been working most hard on for the last year with our wonderful partners from Wright State, now Kansas State, Pascal Hitzler and his wonderful students, is the ontology, along with Jeff Nixter at OCLC. And that is, if you're going to have all those things in your big bucket, I love the bucket metaphor. You're going to have all those things in your big bucket, you need to have a data model. You need to have a way to say, how does this data all work together? How is it meaningful? So we built what's called an ontology, and that's something else you guys will get to see that says, here's how you can pull that data out of that big bucket and still make sense. Okay? And that particular part will actually help to make sure that everything going in is valid. So is that a good overview? That kind of makes sense of what we're trying to do with the project? As we go along, we'll try to explain the parts in more detail to be helpful. But as I said over and over again, this conference is only the beginning. We hope to just keep moving forward and collecting more and more people, kind of snowballing this. We did this in 2013. We had kind of a wonderful start to this with our wonderful partners and have been moving forward. We got to this point, and now we want to kind of expand it and bring in all kinds of other data. Questions, concerns?
Dean, you make it sound so easy.
Well, I have to single out one person, Catherine Foley up here. Who worked with both Gwen and Paul for years, which in itself should give her merit badges. She's been working 4 years to put together this whole data model with vocabulary, along with our whole team of people here at Matrix doing a great job, as well as every single one of our original partners. We actually took one day where we spent 2 days, we locked them all in the room and said, okay, you have to come up with a vocabulary. It was quite, Paul, it worked, didn't it?
We're getting there.
But that's the other thing to keep in mind. Yes, it's been really complex, it's been really kind of a work in progress, but we'll never be finished. Because some scholars are going to go out and find totally new kind of data. And this is the wonderful part about this. It's a horrible history of slavery, and that we can't deny. But within that history, there are amazing stories of perseverance. There are amazing stories of difference. Slavery isn't just one thing, but it's many things as you go around the world. And we need to be able to bring out that kind of robust picture of what slavery really meant historically, and not just some kind of single vision of what it is. Of course, for us, most of our students are always amazed to find that most of the enslaved people went to South America and not North America. But, yes, Elvis.
Yeah, how long do you think before you show us a mock-up?
How long before we think we, well, if you, at the last partner meeting, we did show a mock-up. And we will actually show a few snippets of the mock-up we've had. As Paul knows, we're actually successful at connecting some people across the databases that we already have, disambiguating who they are. So we will be kind of showing you those things along the way. But what's really important is we have 8 original partners. In order for this to work, we're going to need, everyone in this room, and then we're going to need, a dozen times what's in this room to actually bring this to life and to make it work. Because it's not going to work until we can get millions and millions of bits of data into the system. Because as we know, for the most part, this is a very fragmentary history of collecting little bits of data here, little bits of data there. Other questions? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about how the review process works to get something incorporated? We heard peer review mentioned.
Actually, I'm going to leave that to Ethan's going to talk a little more about that, and Daryl's going to be heading that up with Ethan about the whole review process. But basically, it's going to be one of the things that we're hoping, and this is one of the things that Mellon is really centered on. Mellon is interested in the educational portion because when I met with them originally, they were concerned about the idea that people, especially in today's America, had a very thin knowledge of what slavery was, historical slavery. But we actually got our funding under scholarly publishing area with Mellon. They're very interested in the notion that you, as humanists, actually publish your data. We live in a weird world where if you're in the sciences, you publish your data, but what we tend to do is we go out and collect our data, we write our article, we put our data in a drawer, and then we die, right? Maybe we retire. You don't have to die. You retire, and then your kids look at the data and go, "What is this? Why? What can I do with it?" It goes away. So we really want to be a place where this can be deposited, but we'll also have to peer review it. Is it really good data? Can we send it back to you for some work to make it more conducive to being ingested, and things like that? But they'll talk more about that. Yes.
Just on the education side, will this only be accessible for English speakers, or is it possible for?
No, we hope to make it accessible in multiple languages. Because actually one of our big areas is we hope to be Brazil. So yes, we will. Originally, it's going to be in English.
The interface, not the data itself.
Not the data itself. No, the data, we already have multiple languages in the data. But the interface itself is going to be originally in English, but we want to build up that power. As Wikibase and Wikipedia has the power to actually work in multiple languages. All right, great. Then we can take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next session that Darryl will be chairing.
Then someone can bring you the coffee.
Anyone's dry?
Good plan.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Kayla.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'll be presenting next.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that my websites are.
We will look at that in a moment. I have to copy a presentation in.